Welcome to the Happier and Healthier podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marlowe, and this is a place where we don't rely on good luck or good genes for our health and happiness, but rather we create it with our thoughts and our actions each and every single day. Each week, I'll bring you a thought or a guest that will help you live your happiest and healthiest life. Are you ready? Welcome back to the Happier and Healthier podcast. Today's guest is Mark Groves, who's a human relationship specialist, and he's known for speaking and sharing his no BS relationship advice. We actually met a few months ago, earlier this year, at Wanderlust Oahu, where he was speaking, and I really loved what he had to say. It's really refreshing to get relationship advice that has no BS. So I'm excited to share his thoughts with you guys today. So thanks for being here, Mark.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So your advice is very to the point, and I know you're all about relationships and connections. So how do we build deeper connections and better relationships?
Whew, go right with the loaded gun, right? Well, in order to foster deeper connections, we have to have, I'm sure people have heard this numerous times, that you can't go deeper with someone else than you've gone with yourself. And so the more you can understand and hold space for someone else's anger, frustration, love, compassion, you have to be able to hold it for yourself too, because there's sort of like this idea that if you can't model it for you, how do you provide it? So the key to deeper, more fulfilling relationships is definitely, seeing your partner or any type of relationship. It doesn't really matter. You can get triggered by work. You can get triggered by family. Actually, families seem to have a special past to triggering us. That we can look at those triggers and see that there's actually this invitation to grow, this invitation to heal something, this invitation to build mastery in an area. Because when you hear someone like, Eckhart Tolle talking, and he's like, that is your pain body, that is being, he talks about how every reaction is not really a reaction. It's like a filter through a past painful experience. And that's really true in a lot of senses. Every time we get hurt by a partner or something like that, if we're not responding in a compassionate, open way, which doesn't mean not standing up for yourself and all of that, but if we're responding in an angry, shut down, disconnecting way, then there's something old that's living there. There's some research, I think it's from Harville Hendricks. I can't remember it specifically who it was, but I remember them saying that every current conflict is 90% old stuff and 10% what's happening in the moment. And whether that's even research-based, it doesn't even matter because we all know that to be true, I think.
For sure. I think everything's perspective, right? It's how we view the world is based on our perspective, and two people can see the same situation or the same event in two very different ways.
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah, like you could be saying something kind even via text, and someone could be in a bad place or in a bad moment, and they could read it through that lens, and all of a sudden you're in a fight with someone and you didn't even know whether you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, well, you came across with this tone, So it's very fascinating. If we could begin to hold both poles, though, that's, I think, where we really start to feel free, is where I can hold my own point of view and at the same time take the time and the space to observe yours. Then I'm free. I'm not only holding on to this. And I think this is true about our belief systems, our spiritual practices, all of these things. The tighter you hold on to anything you believe about yourself, the less willing you are to see anything another way. Like, just look at what happens when we become extreme believers of anything. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just so easy to see that analogy in religion.
Right. So you mentioned something about one of the keys to deeper connections, better relationships is also knowing yourself. So how do we get there? Because, I think, how do we even know ourselves? And how do we know if we know ourselves?
Yeah, you go spend some time in Tibet in a monastery. No, I don't know. How do you actually do it? Well, we're so distracted these days. And I think we always have been in some sense. And if it wasn't a distraction from having to work really hard in order to provide or whatever, or take care of 5 kids, as previous generations really, unless you were really wealthy, which is where philosophy was birthed from, right, was wealth, because people had spare time while they had someone else make their food in order to think about why we're on this planet. So, part of it is the ability to be able to take space away from stimuli, which meditation can give you access right to that. And being able to have boundaries around things like phones. Just the amount of anxiety and the nervous system response that knowing you might have a new like, or you might have, I mean, this is like attention span on steroids in that we have a lack of it. It's just constantly filtering into us. So I love to be able to observe, when do I seek distraction? When do I go to my phone? For me, it's meditation. When I first started doing it, probably about 7 years ago, I couldn't meditate for 5 minutes. I remember having a timer on my phone and I'd be like, when's it up? When's it up? When's it up? And now I have no problem. I could do 45 minutes. So it's a learned practice. It's a skill. And I think what happens in the space of an access point like meditation, you could do mindful walking meditations too. But once you get into that space, is you start to listen to the thoughts you've never taken the time to actually process, the feelings. And look at people who jump from relationship to relationship. There's a reason that they slip someone else in the spot someone else was just in, because there's something in that space that is terrifying. There's something in the space of loneliness that they don't want to pay attention to. And there's probably many things that it could be. But the moment you start to stay a little longer, to be a little more present, to not check your phone past that point, you start to actually hear things and feel things that maybe you never have. And I think that's the beginning of it, is really paying attention to that.
That's an interesting point you bring up about people who go from one relationship to another without much, if any, break. Is there an ideal time or amount of time to be broken up before you move on to another relationship? Or is there something that people should be doing after each relationship to kind of make sure that the next one is a better one, or, you know?
Yeah, I think the first caveat to all of this is to say no one is ever fully healed before another relationship, because we're never, all of our wounding or emotional pains come from relationships. So, you know, we could be doing super awesome single, and then all of a sudden we get in a relationship. We're like, fuck, I thought I had that thing figured out. And you realize you don't, or you're reactive again. Well, it's because you have another human who could reject you in front of you. You've been, doing yoga. That's not exactly a conflict ridden. Well, hopefully not. So I think there's that first part, is just knowing that it's going to come up, and that's just life. It doesn't mean you're taking a step back. It doesn't mean you're starting over. It just means you're actually growing, and you're being invited again to master something, to heal something. I remember when I don't know where I got this from, but I remember someone saying to me that it takes a month for every year you were together, which I don't think that's based on any research. I'm like, where the fuck did they get that from? But I remember believing it when I was young. But now I don't believe that's so much true, because someone can end a relationship, and usually the person who's ending the relationship has sort of been prepping themselves for a little while. So by the time they actually end it, they're usually emotionally disconnected. They're prepared. The person who's been broken up with, even if they could sense it was coming and they knew, there's something about being very defensive and reactive about it. It came from nowhere. And I think that could be very debilitating for a little while, if not a long time, because people will then go to distractions. They'll go to drinking, they'll go to hooking up, they'll go to drugs, they'll go to anything, addiction, fitness, they'll go to food, and they could do all of those things. So what is the key when you go through a breakup? I remember going through a breakup probably 4 years ago, where as soon as we broke up, I was already asking myself, like, I was really hurting. And I remember just asking myself, what is the learning here? What's the learning here? How is this serving me? And I never would have been able to do that 10 years ago or 12 years ago or 15 years ago or 20. It's just that now I'm able to move from the pain, be in it, and also be looking for the lesson, looking for the wisdom. And I think if you can begin to go through even all your past experiences, and I have clients do this where they write down all of the things that are sticky for them, the moments, and that could be from childhood, that could be many things. And then, so on one column you write that, and then on the right side you write, what is the learning in the experience? And then you tear off the left side and burn it, get rid of the memories, keep the lessons. And I think that's one thing that really helps us navigate breakups, is if we are willing, even if we've been cheated on, because usually those situations are just the result of, and I don't mean just to minimize it, but they're usually the result of bad boundaries. They're usually the result of not speaking our truth. They're usually the result of us abandoning ourselves. So we can either stay in the victim state of, I was cheated on, I'm, the victim of a narcissist, all those things. But at some point you got to take responsibility and move forward. If you just go, I chose them, I chose a lot of this, it's time. And I think that's a very powerful place to go from.
Right. Yeah. And I love the fact that you said, okay, sit down and kind of write the list and reflect, because I think so often we're going through life and we are just so distracted already that we're always just picking up the phone or going on social media. We don't actually reflect about anything, about our day, about a meeting, about a relationship that's really ended. And I think in the reflection, that is where we learn and that is where we grow from. But we're just not doing it as much anymore.
I totally agree. Like, what happens when we're about to reflect? We go to this, right? Like, this to me has been obviously one of the most amazing tools that has ever been created, obviously. But also, I don't think our nervous system was wired to be connected to zillions of people. And I think one of the traps of social media is that we'll find a quick way to place our self-worth in it. And, like, it becomes an addiction. It becomes an addiction. Like, I started to realize that I was getting anxiety around my phone. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to build some new rules. So in the morning, it's on airplane mode till I do my morning ritual, and then I take it off airplane mode. So that way I'm in control. I don't want the phone to control me. I don't want my email to control me. And I think that's a shift.
And so you do have, so Mark has a great Instagram account called Create the Love, and you have like 140,000 plus followers on there, which is quite, significant. So I'm curious now, and Mark posts these great quotes. So I definitely recommend you go check out his account and follow. But are you totally immune to it? Like, have you gotten to a point where you're immune to the likes and the comments, or does it still affect you if maybe a post does not do as well as others?
Oh, I'd be lying if I said it's not a dialogue that happens in my head. When I first started on my Instagram, I knew that I could post something like, I know that if I posted anything female empowerment, it would blow up. That's a guarantee. But what happens is I remember, like, really at the beginning, I can choose to post something that I'm intuitively being drawn to post, or I could post what I know will perform well. And instead of making the outcome or the desired outcome get the most likes or comments, I made it change one life. And then, inevitably I'd get one comment that said, needed this today. So that, for sure it's in my head. I think about it, and I also have to just honor that thought, but not make it decide for me, because it still exists. It's just not what drives me. And the pull of having 140,000 opinions is hard too, because you share something that's controversial perhaps, and you're going to hear a lot about it. And you potentially, people get reactive and their feelings get hurt and things like that. And that's more rare than it is common, but you still, the humanness, you're like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. Or you
Right.
go back to being a kid still.
Right. And I remember you saying, we were talking a little bit about this at the festival, that sometimes people will tag their partners, right? Like if you post a quote about something, they'll kind of like do a little dig at someone or whatever. So I'm curious, because you basically have, this is almost like a science experiment or a lab, right? Because you're seeing firsthand 140,000 plus people are thinking about relationships. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the biggest questions you get, or biggest problems, or things that you think people struggle with the most or don't understand when it comes to relationships and love?
That's a great question. I would say it's usually very simple things, like it's usually lessons I learned. And I'm sure when I asked advice about them, people are like, how does he not fucking know this? But it's simple things like, when do you ask the person if you're in a relationship? Or, this person's being this way and this way, how do I communicate about that? We're not taught the simple dialogues of relationship. We're not taught how to communicate, really. Unless you're taking an outward emotional IQ course, they very seldom, if ever, touch on romantic relationships. Because in business, they're afraid that you're going to talk about love, and then you might fall in love and have sex, and which happens actually a lot in business. So not doing it isn't helping. And the other side is, in school, we're not talking about it because we're afraid people might talk about sex and then might touch each other and have sex again. Like, we're so fear-based that we won't go to the experience of love, which I think is fascinating because it doesn't always have to be in this romantic context. And the less emotional intelligence you have, the less you can even navigate whether is this love, is this a good choice? How do I talk to my partner? How do I not? So I think one of the keys is really learning, how do you communicate your hurt? And how do you hear another's hurt without making it about you? Because I think that, I mean, formally for me too, and still a battle, is how do you not get defensive so you can actually receive the information and then stay connected? Because I don't think through communication, where do we learn it? We learn it from our families generally, right? Or other people who influenced us, or families of friends, families, or school. But there's not really like, hey, this is what a beautiful, healthy dialogue looks like. And I think the other aspect of it is, I really believe that most of us place our self-worth in whether we're in a relationship or whether we're married or we're, I feel like there's this hierarchy in relationships, like marriage, then engagement, then dating, then God forbid you're fucking single, right? Like there's this hierarchy there, but we also have a hierarchy of time. The longer you're together, the more established you are. You're sort of like the matriarch and patriarch of, the king and queen of, and I don't mean to heteronormalize that, but there's this weird thing that we've done where we celebrate being in a relationship and a long one. Just look at how we celebrate anniversaries. But when was the last time you ever heard your grandma and grandpa say, oh, we just keep getting deeper and deeper? Like often people are together 75 years and don't like each other. And so I don't think time is a marker of success, but it's certainly not the only one. And I think we've really done people a disservice where they don't realize that if you're single, you're not broken, because as soon as you make your self-worth based on someone choosing you, then if they don't choose you, you're fucked. Right. They take it with them. And a lot of us make our relationship our life. Well, you lose your relationship, you lose your life. And it sounds dramatic, but it's really true that can you be face to face with another and still love them even if they don't choose you? And that ultimately is unconditional love. But if whether you love yourself is based on whether they choose you, you won't be able to let them go. And I think that's a key that I certainly didn't understand till I definitely not till my mid 30s.
Yeah. Unconditional love is something that I think we all like in theory and we all want in theory, but sometimes in actual action, it's a little bit harder to do, right? That's definitely something
Totally.
That we need to work on, I think.
I was joking with Kylie, my partner, the other day. We were saying, I love you unconditionally under these conditions, like that you do this, this, and this. And it is true. I agree with you. We idolize it, and it's something we throw around. Just like, you meet someone who's, and I don't mean to pick on this, but just as such a simple example is you meet someone who's a yogi, who's all about peace and love and light. And then you see them get mad and they're like a fucking bull, like it's just, the worlds don't equal, and they speak believing something versus practicing. And that's why like speaking to unconditional love versus practicing it, it's so easy to talk about anything. To actually do shit is
it's another story.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, and I know you work a lot with people as well, one-on-one, and helping them connect better, be better communicators, and build better relationships. So I'm curious, because I was just talking about this with a friend recently, here in New York City. There's a lot of women who are perpetually single and who'll say, oh, the guys in New York, they suck. They're so hard, right?
Yeah, there's only 5 million.
Yeah. And this could really be any city. I mean, this could be anywhere.
This is every city.
This is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's also people who are literally like one relationship after another relationship after another relationship.
Yeah, totally.
So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what do you think? What are some of the characteristics maybe that make up these types of people? And like, what could they be doing, right? If you're perpetually the single person, what questions should you be asking yourself, or what action should you be taking to maybe flip that around? And let's start with that.
So if you're perpetually single, I don't want people to feel like there's something wrong with them because they are. I think the catch to it all is to really ask yourself, are you truly available? Because certainly what I see with people who are perpetually single, and again, it sounds like it's a bad thing. It's not. If you're in that space in your life where you just want to play and be single and pursue your career or whatever it is, cool. If you're using those things as a socially acceptable way of staying detached, then there's something up. And I think if people can say, am I truly, because if you say you want a great relationship, and if you're getting real with yourself, are you choosing moments that actually grow towards that? So if you're saying, I want a great relationship, and then, you're banging someone in a bathroom stall at a bar, those aren't really coincide. That's a short-term relationship. So you should get clearer on what type of relationship you want. Again, not a judgment. It's just that what is your intention and what are you choosing? And I think we often use excuses, I'm going to call them that, scarce mentality beliefs like there's no good men out there, all women want is money. And that's true sometimes, but those aren't your people. So if you get mad about those people, then you're stuck on those people. If I found out that, and I was dating and single, and I found out that some woman just wanted money, I'd be like, sweet, I just filtered another one out. Like, it's great. That's why when I posted the other day where I said that ghosting is great, which a lot of people took totally wrong. But I was saying that it's a filtration process. And when someone ghosts you, it's painful. I get it. But in dating, it's also, if someone ghosts you, there's someone you were going to dump anyways because they can't handle conflict. So I think that we have to be very mindful that often we'll use our, I think we should have high standards, but often we'll use our standards as a way of managing availability. Like, truly, do you actually want to be loved? Because a lot of people in the driver's seat of single life are actually just avoiding intimacy, avoiding true connection. And I think, one of the most powerful questions that I think someone can answer is, when I let people love me, they. And how you finish that will generally be what you're avoiding. And I think one thing that is both challenging and tough is for women, generally women are in the emotional driver's seat, right? There's more connections between the left and right side of their brains. They're emotionally trained from a very young age to be empathetic and caring and compassionate. They have more language around emotion. So they generally will be able to manage and communicate things in a much better way in a heteronormative relationship. But if they meet a man who can communicate at the same level or greater, that will throw them off their ass because they'll never have met anything like that. So they might come up with a reason that he's not great. Like, I just don't feel attracted to him. I think we really have to adjust what is attraction to us too. I think not that we shouldn't be attracted to the person we choose. That's important. But I think often our chemistry monitor is wound-based. Like, we pursue people who hurt us in a similar way that we've always been hurt. And so we somehow are only attracted to those people. Isn't that fucked? I think that's fucked.
It is. It's so weird. And it's weird how and you mentioned, it's like when we focus on this one type of person, like a gold digger, right? Or whatever, the guy that's emotionally unavailable or whatever it is, it's also, if we're putting all our attention on that is what we end up attracting, right?
Oh my God, yeah. And then, see, this is the thing. I hear some guy say something like that, and he's hanging out at clubs, getting bottle service, and he's meeting these chicks who hang around at bottle service. No offense if you hang around at bottle service, but he's like, I just don't get it. Yeah. Like, I remember being at a Vegas club and this girl coming up and talking to me, and I was like, this is a trick. This doesn't happen. This was like probably 8 years ago. And she was an escort, like, imagine if I'm hanging out in Vegas clubs and I'm getting mad that the only women I meet are escorts or bachelorette parties. I'm in the wrong place. Not that you can't meet people at the club, but my point is your environments are also dictating. And so if you're hanging around other people who are complaining about that shit and living a life that doesn't move towards what you say you want, then you're just going to stay perpetually in the same cycle. And it doesn't mean, like, if you're a group of single women that you shouldn't hang out as a group of single women or guys or whatever. But it's like, surround yourself with people who love the way you want to love. And that way you'll naturally just start being like them because you just, you'll adapt. You'll learn skills from them. You'll learn things subconsciously just through their way of communicating and being that you don't even have to do the work. It's like osmosis.
Right. And one thing I also think is important, and I'm curious if you agree, is also getting really clear on what you do want and the type of person you do want to be with. Because again, when you're then focusing on that, you're then attracting that type of person.
100%. Like, actually be fucking honest with what you truly want, because that drives me nuts when someone's like, I want a relationship, and they're choosing someone who they would never have a relationship with. And I'm like, you realize that you're confusing the universe, God, whoever, whatever you believe in. You're confusing yourself, though, on a very literal level. Your child in you is going, I thought we wanted a relationship. Why are we choosing douchey number one over here? You know, and then we're upset that we're not meeting great people when we're filling the space with someone else. And no one can step into a space that's filled by what you don't want. You know, and I think life literally can change in a moment. You could be at a coffee shop when you could have been at a booty call. And at that coffee shop, you could be in line and someone could say, have you ever had the almond milk here? And all of a sudden you're in a relationship. And I wrote this poem once because I was thinking about that. And it was, I forget, something along the lines of, I hope you don't spend your life loving with half your heart because you didn't believe that I would show up at the coffee shop where we were meant to meet. And this idea of like, what are you trading things for? What are you trading momentary glimpses on your phone? What are you trading likes for? What are you trading casual sex for? What are you trading cocaine for? You know, and don't get me wrong, no judgments on all of this. It's just that if you're going to complain about what you want, what are you trading? Because there's a trade. And I think that's the most powerful and most challenging thing in our life, is actually saying no to those things that keep us from what we truly want. And man, it's hard. You know, like I hear that all the time. It's hard. Yeah, it's fucking hard. Because if it was easy, you wouldn't appreciate it. If it was easy, you wouldn't know the value of it when you got it. And the person you have to become to get that thing, that's the jam. It's the juice on the way. It's the saying no to things that don't serve you, that build you into the type of person that gets the type of relationship you want.
Yeah, I think, you know, we are just sort of raised with a lot of scarcity mindset, a lot of fear mindset.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's also pressure, like as a woman, especially, it's like, oh, if you're not married by a certain age, or if you don't have kids by a certain age, then, you know, there's judgment, you know, like you said earlier. So I think we have all this societal pressure to conform to something. And we're just scared that if we don't say yes to whatever comes our way, then nothing else is going to come.
Yeah, and I get that. That's why I think learning how to get to know your chemistry, like that is so important. Your ability to pick, that really is such an important thing to learn, is how to pick a great partner. And the other side of that is, look what's true about all of those points. If you're a girl who has kids too young, you'll get judged by, you know, some badass CEO female in New Yorker who's 32 and is like, I'm killing the game over here. I can't believe you're a mom. And so you get shamed for being a mom. And if you stay at home, you get shamed for being a stay-at-home mom. And if you work, you get shamed by mom. You know, like the whole point is, it's always other people's fucking opinions. And so it's like, what do you want? What do you want to choose? And of course, the greatest challenge of that is you will always be faced by other people's opinions. You'll be going against family. You'll be going against culture. You'll be going, I mean, we're in this really different time where scarcity was a massive reality of previous generations, especially I think a lot of us are children of first generation immigrants usually. And I know I am. And so my mom and dad literally had to hustle. I got hand-me-downs my whole childhood from my brother. And that sucked. I hated that. But they had a scarce mindset because scarcity was real. And so I can understand that their world and my world are different. And so when they're like, hey, Mark, have you thought about this? Or maybe you shouldn't. It really comes from love, but I can't have it dictate because they can't see what I can see, which is possibility. You know, because their possibility was Canada. You know, like, we're going to move to Canada. And I'm like, I'm going to start an entrepreneurship consulting business. You know, that's my openness.
Yeah, you just have to, I think, really gets back to being really clear on what you want and kind of putting the blinders on. Like, I think writing a list, like I've heard actually two stories. One of a young woman who wrote this list of like 50 things that she wanted in her, you know, next boyfriend, whatever. And people are like, oh, that, you know, you're being too picky. Like there's too much stuff on there. Just, you know, be happy with whatever you get. Long story short, within a matter of a couple months, she met the exact guy that met majority of the criteria, got married, and or stayed married. And then a couple years ago, I also read another story. I think it was in Humans of New York about this older woman. She was in her 80s. And I think she was widowed. And she was like, okay, I'm ready to kind of get back out there. And she wrote a list on a piece of paper, one by one. These are the qualities that she wanted in a man. And she met the man in a matter of weeks. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I think just getting clear and like writing it out it really helps us focus on and put our attention on what we do want and put ourselves in the situation where we can find that versus just, okay, I don't want this, I don't want that.
Yeah, with clients, what I have them do, and I do it even in workshops and stuff, is I have people write out exactly what you said, a list of what they want. And then I have them write, what are they willing to do in exchange for it?
I love that.
Because my belief is nothing is free. And I don't mean like free universe, provide, manifesting stuff. I mean like, who are you going to be? And if you're willing to be the things you want and be the type of partner you want, because you hear people all the time say stuff like, I want someone who has values and who doesn't have one night stands, and then they're out having one night stands. It's, again, not judgment, but it's like what you want is not aligned with who you are. And when I met Kylie a couple of years ago, I created a list a couple months before. I also created a deadline. I do that too with clients, is I have them create a time that feels like a little stretch for them of like, mine was by December 31st and it was October. And I wrote what I wanted and what I was willing to do, which was stay in my integrity, live a life filled with virtue, blah, 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 blah. And I'm ready to build, my empire or whatever that meant at the time. And she wrote it one in December. And the night she wrote hers, I messaged her.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of crazy.
That is insane. So that brings up an interesting question. You're saying like, okay, write what you want, but also what you're willing to do for that. But I do think it's important to like look at ourselves first and also be a good partner, right? We're always so fixated on like, okay, what does the other person have? Like what qualities do they have? But then we forget to like look at ourselves. So any other self-introspective questions or stuff we should be asking and making sure that we're showing up and we're being the best partner that we could be in a relationship?
Yeah, I would look for your ability to have great boundaries, and I would look for your ability to be honest with yourself. And what I mean by that is, if you can't actually be honest with who you are, like really own the shit that you're not good at and where you're out of integrity in your life. If you want someone who's honest and tells you the truth and communicates, because we all say that, I want someone who can communicate. But then when we're afraid to talk about something, we don't. Well, we're not living what we said. So now why would they ever come talk to us about something they're afraid to talk about? And then we get mad at them when they don't. So for me, it's about that radical level of responsibility, which is I will always show up as the best version of me. And when I learn something, I will always become what I need to become from that learning. Because I used to learn shit all the time. And then I just keep repeating the same mistakes. And I would say, oh, I made another mistake. But really, at that point, they were choices because I had the level of knowledge to change. But I wasn't, because it was easier to continue the behavior I was doing, which was just hooking up with chicks. And then I'd feel shitty the next day. And I'd be like, well, I don't know why I feel this way. It was so, and then one day it just clicked for me. I'm like, you are not living at your highest level of knowledge. You're such a coward. Bad self-talk, but it was effective because I changed. From that moment, I made a rule. I will always live at my highest level of knowledge. And that was transformative for me because I feel like we're all holding on to so much wisdom from all of these painful experiences. And if we were to just take responsibility for our part, we would be indestructible. We'd learn boundaries. We'd learn to use our voice. We learn all these different things that we could grow into who we truly could become today. So I think one of the main questions is, what are you not taking responsibility for? What are you not honest with yourself about? Are you angry? Do you hurt people? Do you make choices that are destructive? How do you handle when you feel rejected? How do you handle conflict? And then go read books, go take workshops. I mean, you can literally get so many courses for free online. I mean, universities give out courses for free, but there's so many amazing coaches and therapists and stuff who are giving out free information. And fucking books. Oh my God, books are amazing. You can learn so much from a book. And boundaries, I think, are just probably the most important thing for people to learn. Because if you have great boundaries, that's what creates wholeness, because they create a boundary around who you are. And they make it so you learn to take responsibility for your own feelings, but also not to take responsibility for someone else's. And that is that's tough, because we come from, children of families where most people don't take responsibility for their feelings, where, we were talking earlier about guilt trips and shaming, right? Like where people use those techniques as a form of control. Well, they're not necessarily, they're effective, but the person on the receiving end is not using great boundaries to say, that's yours, this is mine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. No, and I like what you said, that boundaries make you whole, right? Because they do. That is what kind of separates and makes you who you are, and puts kind of a stake in the ground, because otherwise we're just like fluid and kind of going wishy-washy all over the place. And you kind of end up in this relationship purgatory where,
purgatory.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the interesting part, is normally I think almost all of us have this experience where we come from families where we had like an angry parent, an addict parent, a narcissistic parent, or someone in our family or experience who is like that. And right away, what happens is the whole family system has to pivot around that person. Well, I can get into more detail on this. I do in my boundaries course, where I talk about how when that happens, you weren't able to have a need or an identity, because the whole family was about one person. And you might have been that person too. That's possible. But what happens is then we don't end up sort of identifying. We don't end up having our own identity, because if we even had a need in the family, no one would have served it. No one would have helped it. No one would have satisfied it. So we learn to just not have needs. We learn to not have boundaries. And we end up, often I see that pattern where we then end up for our life trying to help other people, trying to fix them. But if we were to just take a step back and begin to listen to ourselves, I think it is a matter of, it's a learned skill because if you ask someone like, what do you want? What do you need? And they're like, I don't know, because they've never known, because no one ever listened. And that takes some time. I think there's even an amount of grief you have to feel in that, to say like, wow, I'm sad that I was never really attended to. And meditation is probably a good access point.
Yeah. Meditation and reflection, just that self-reflection is just taking the time to not do anything else and to think and to reflect. Yeah.
And a good hug from a good friend.
Yeah. Good hugs. Hugs are always helpful.
Hugs are amazing.
So 2 more questions. One, I'm curious, do you think we should always choose love, or are there situations where it makes sense to be a little bit more practical?
Well, I think the term choose love becomes misleading in the wrong sense, in that choosing love can mean choosing anger, and it can mean choosing boundaries. Boundaries are love, because they're what preserve you and the other person. They're what say like, your energy is not allowed beyond this way. And if you're going to be that way, you don't have access to me. And anger we confuse often with aggression, because that's what we've observed. But anger is what changes worlds. It's what says no more. It's what enacts a great boundary. And so I think choosing love can be a convoluted idea. I mean, I think we should always choose love, but I think it should be an educated form of love, which is you always have to have your own back. Like that's maybe the most important thing. And I think a lot of us we haven't had modeled self-care, taking care of ourselves. And I think for women especially, the message has been give yourself up for others. And so what do we see? We see women who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s who've never actually allowed access to anyone to them, because they've only seen former generations of women lose themselves completely. And that's that perpetual singledom that I was talking about earlier, is like, are those walls you have, or are they boundaries? And being able to say like, it protects you from what you've seen previously in previous generations, maybe from your mother. And so I think there is really this aspect of being able to recognize the balance of who I am. Because I think this is the greatest challenge in relationship, is how do you hold on to who you are and be in love? How do you choose love and choose yourself? And man, that's a learning. I think you have to know what not doing it is in order to know what doing it is. And that's why you have to fuck up to know, that's life. That's being a human, is making mistakes. And God, do we ever make a lot of mistakes in love? And that doesn't stop. And that just keeps going. But what do you do with the mistakes? And can you choose the loving, compassionate side for yourself? But is it choosing love to hold an assertive, responsible tone with your own behavior? I think it is. Is it choosing love to be selfish? I mean, I guess it depends.
Yeah, it's difficult. I know it's a very wide and abstract question. And I think it is tough to sometimes, like when we get into relationships and we are in love, that we do put ourselves on the back burner and make sacrifices and make choices that we don't necessarily want. But I guess that's where the boundaries come in, and having clear boundaries and making sure that we love and are taking care of ourselves first and foremost. And I think we can always choose love in all things, but still be practical and make sure that, yeah.
Well, and I think exactly what you're saying of being able to have these boundaries around the choice. Like, I don't think choosing anything should feel like abandoning yourself, but there are going to be compromises in relationship and life where you're going to be like, something about this feels anxiety inducing, and anxiousness is such an important feeling for people to process because it's future oriented. Where's this ship going? And I don't feel good about where this ship is going in the way it's being constructed right now. For example, if you're in a long distance relationship and someone's moving and you're like, okay, I'm okay to do a long distance relationship for a certain time period and under the condition that we FaceTime every day, and that way you're building security around what feels like an insecure situation. And of course that could feel, I just believe that compromise is always about finding a middle ground that still feels like you don't lose you in order to keep anything. You have to lose you to keep anything. You get them, but you don't have you. That's awful. That sounds like a life of pain.
Yeah, it's so funny, like when you're a little bit removed from the situation, how these things are so clear, but sometimes when you're in the situation, right, it's a little bit more murky, which is, again, where I think that meditation and self-reflection comes in. And
well, yeah, and like I was saying before, like the 140,000 people all have very similar questions. They're always simple things. They're always like very simple, nuanced behaviors that I've had to learn and learn and learn and learn too. And I often say to people who follow me, like, I'm just a chapter ahead in some places, but I've been in your chapter. I know what it's like to be there. And I have many more chapters. I have fucking a lifetime of chapters to learn, and I'm going to continue. And that's why relationship, I don't think, is ever mastered. It's always this constant, you're always going to get new behaviors, new experiences. I laugh a lot thinking like, this onion doesn't get smaller. I peel a layer and the shit gets bigger. And I'm like, fuck, thought I figured that out.
Yeah, it's constant growth and constant evolvement. We can't stay still, I think, in anything. Our knowledge, our relationships.
Yeah, and like, just as fascinating of like relationship to others, I think is such a magnifying glass to our relationship to everything. But man, I could figure out about someone and their relationship to other people just from their relationship to food or their relationship to their body, because how you do one thing is literally how you do all of it. And you might find an area of mastery in your body or work or food or whatever. And mastery can be a tight word there because it could also be fanaticism or addiction. But usually that will be an escape from relational pain, in my experience.
Yeah, it's true. And I definitely agree. How you do one thing is how you do everything. Interesting. So I'm curious if you have just one tip or one piece of advice. We talked about so many things, but if you have one tip that you could leave our listeners if they want to live a happier and healthier life and maybe have better relationships, what would that be?
God, one tip. I got to bring it down to one big thing to live a happier and healthier life. I think I'm going to go with what I said at the beginning, that you have to get to know who you are, and you have to get to know what matters to you, and you have to get to know really learning what your passions are, what is important to you. Because the more you uncover that, the deeper you can go with anyone. We often use relationships as a distraction from ourselves. And just like we use everything as a distraction from ourselves, our phones, our food, or whatever. But the more you cultivate a deep, loving relationship with yourself and take the time to actually say, what do I want? And be willing to listen past the I don't know, or I'm not worthy of having needs, or that's the little kid in us who's never had presence. And if we can actually be present to that part of us, all of a sudden your relationship to food changes, your relationship to work changes. Like it all becomes so much easier. If you master relationship to self and relationship to other, you'll master life is at your fingertips, because everything else is just an extension of those two things, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great piece of advice. Well, thank you for all of your advice. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, actually. But where can people find you and connect with you?
As you mentioned before, on my Instagram at Create the Love, also on Twitter at Create the Love. And then I have a YouTube channel called Mark Groves TV. That's the link it's under. And I have a website, markgroves.tv, like television. And I'm also on Facebook. So people can find me anywhere, really.
Everywhere.
If you Google me, you will find me.
Yeah, and I'll include links to all of the places that he mentioned in the show notes. So definitely check out that Instagram. Lots of great advice and tips on there.
And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Mark.
So much fun. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in this week. If you enjoyed and got value from this episode, I'd be so grateful if you can take just 1 minute to leave an honest review on iTunes, as that will help us reach more people and get incredible guests on the show. To say thank you, email a screenshot of your review to info@mariamarlowe.com and we'll send you a free 3-day healthy eating sugar detox meal plan. After each and every episode, I encourage you to come say hi on Instagram at Maria Marlowe, that's MariaMarlowe, or in the private Happier and Healthier podcast group on Facebook. In both of these places, we can continue the conversation about today's episode, so come and share what you think. If you want more, you can also head to mariamarlowe.com, where you'll find tons of healthy recipes, meal plans, and resources to help you live your healthiest and happiest life. Lastly, if there's someone you know who'd enjoy this podcast, make their day, and mine, and send it to them now. Until next time, don't forget, health and happiness are a choice. Our thoughts become our reality, so make sure you're thinking up a masterpiece.